Today's guest is Dr. Neha Gupta, Deputy Director of the Clinical Resource Hub at the Veterans Health Administration, serving veterans across the Western U.S. Dr. Gupta provides a passion for healthcare innovation with a heartfelt commitment to community and connection. And I had a great conversation with her. It was truly inspiring. We talked about family traditions and the great ways that we can preserve them for future generations. And she's an amazing person. I'm really excited for you to hear this uplifting and meaningful conversation. Thank you so much again for coming on and having a conversation with me. It really means a lot. So, I guess to start things off, I know that you're a physician, but you also work with the Department of Veteran Affairs. So, could you tell me more about what you do, what keeps you busy, and like how you spend your spare time?
Sure. Yes. So I'm a physician. I started my career at Highland Hospital, which is the county public hospital safety net system for Alameda County. I was there for maybe 7 years or so before I decided to make a move. And so I've been at the VA for almost 3 years. I'm the deputy director of our regional telehealth hub, which is an area that spans from Guam all the way to Nevada. And we provide all sorts of services to veterans in rural areas, from specialty care to primary care to urgent care, mental health, pharmacy services. All of those services are provided via virtual health means like video or telephone to veterans all over. In my
Oh,
spare time, you asked me about my spare time too, I think.
yeah, just what would keep you busy like in your free time?
Yeah, so I have two little kids. I have a kindergartner who's at head race, and then I also have a 3-year-old who's in preschool, and they keep me most busy. So we live in Oakland without family. Both my family and my husband's family are in Southern California. And so we are busy juggling full-time jobs and taking care of our kids most of the time. I went to college and medical school and residency in the Bay Area, so we both have vast networks of community and friends up here, and so we do try to see our friends as much as possible. But the kids and our visits keep us pretty busy.
Yeah, so I guess like more on that part about like your college experience. And I know that you started off with like consulting, right, in the 2000s before entering the medical and civic field. So like more about like when did you know what career you wanted to pursue and like how that affected your college experience as well.
Sure. I'm still not sure I know what career I want to pursue. So, with that caveat in mind, I was pretty undecided in college. I grew up in a relatively traditional mindset of, I think, medicine, law, engineering. But I was in college, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I did do the pre-med thing for the most part. Stanford makes it somewhat easy. You can do a major called human biology, which allows you to do a bunch of different things, throw it in your major and graduate without having to do like a traditional biology or chemistry major. So I did that and I did economics, international relations, in addition to all of the sort of pre-med requirements. I think I even had to do summer school to do some of my pre-med requirements because I was so interested in so many of the courses that were offered at Stanford. But I was a person who took the MCAT twice because I let it expire the first time, and the LSAT, and I studied significantly for the GMAT, but didn't end up taking it. I was quite undecided for a long time about what I wanted to do. And that's really why I did consulting when I graduated college. I was loath to apply to a graduate school until I had something to say in a personal statement. So I decided I wouldn't apply until I had something to say. So I did the job search, which took me to consulting, which allows you to see lots of industries, develop some skills, work with really smart people, get paid decently well. My parents had raised us to think that you go to high school and then college and then grad school, and there were no breaks in between. And so when I had the proposal of working in between college and whatever graduate school, I wanted to make sure that I was going to be self-sufficient, doing something productive, and not just lazing around. So that's how I started doing consulting. Consulting was a really transformative time in my life. I lived in Los Angeles. I worked in downtown, one of those big skyscrapers, really incredible people. You're meeting with CEOs and CFOs of big Fortune 500 companies as like a 22-year-old with very little world experience, traveled all over the world. It truly incredible. And I think a couple of years into consulting, I had this series of parallel moments. One moment was I was in Hong Kong and we were working on this big integration of these two large companies, and they were talking about how to take over this mom and pop business in China, which didn't feel great as a somewhat idealistic 22-year-old. And my father, who's an oncologist, a community oncologist in Southern California, had a friend come visit his home with his, I think, 18-year-old son who had some type of hematologic malignancy. I can't remember what. And this dad was so worried, and his son looked so sick. He had like blood on his shirt. And I sat there with my dad and this man and his son, and I watched the impact that my dad had on this family in this 25-minute encounter at 7 o'clock in the evening on a Saturday night. And I had this moment of, what am I doing? And what is it that I really want to do? And it really was this like huge shift in my mindset about I grew up not particularly rich, but with an incredible amount of privilege. And I didn't feel that proud to describe what I did before, making rich people richer, or rich companies richer. And I really wanted to help people the way that I saw people around me help others. And I really wanted to give back to people who had less than me. And not only did I decide to do medicine, I also decided to do medicine for the underserved. And so I did a primary care track for the urban underserved at San Francisco General. And that's what brought me to Highland. And then I wanted to be even bigger. I wanted to make even bigger impacts. I went to the VA, which is the largest safety net in the country. It's the biggest integrated healthcare system. The VA is obviously going through a lot of change right now, but I didn't know, what I didn't know back when I started 3 years ago.
Yeah, that's actually really nice to hear, and especially like the part about how you got in like back into the medical field is like this event that like made you genuinely interested in helping people. Because especially since you mentioned earlier, like the stereotype associated with being a doctor, doing this stuff because of like the money, because of the pressures, but you're doing it because you're interested in it and you want to
Yeah,
help.
my parents never pressured me to go into medicine, but there was so much peripheral commentary. Oh, are you going to be a physician like your dad? That I really resisted it. And I didn't want to do it just to not do what people expected I was going to do, I think. But not doing something because people expect you to do them is just as silly as doing something because they expect you to. You're still making your decision based on the expectations of others. But for me, taking a little bit of extra time to like really come to the decision on my own was really important. It is such a slog. It's a really long time, a lot of training, a lot of money to do it if your heart's not in it. And so I was glad for the extra time.
Yeah, yeah. So more on that. How would you describe your like personal experience growing up as an Indian American kid? Like school, like family, social.
Yeah, so I grew up in a suburb outside Los Angeles. It's in the Inland Empire. If you've heard of the Claremont colleges, I grew up right around there. Um, a fairly white neighborhood, as you might imagine, but my parents had a really expansive community of other Indians. So big family friend network, both local within a 10-minute radius, but then also bigger in the 40 to 60-minute radius. So I grew up around a lot of Indians, even if my neighborhood was quite white. I went to a very small independent school. Head races massive by comparison. It was K through 8. Classes were like 18 a class, only one class per grade. The class was reasonably diverse. There weren't they're diverse for me at the time. So I was not the only Indian kid in my class. In a class of 18, there were a few Indians and a one or to Asians, and it felt mixed at the time. I don't remember feeling, oh, I'm the only one in this classroom, but it was still pretty small. And I went there for 9 years before graduating and going to high school. So it was all I knew, a very kind of small, protected environment, a really small campus. My niece, my 10-year-old niece actually goes there now, which is a bit wild to think about. So that was my sort of upbringing. That was my school experience. I then went to a fairly small college prep type high school that had, I think, 80 kids a class. So bigger than what I had growing up, but still quite tiny. And it had a separate boys' school and girls' school on the same campus. So co-ed classes, some single gender classes, but separate student bodies, etc. So that was my educational experience growing up. I would say that the high school I went to also had a fair number of Indians and Asians and Middle Eastern people, and also because it was a part boarding school, even had international folks from mostly China, but also some other countries as well.
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, more on that international part. So you've had a lot of international experience, like not only connecting with people, but also working in different areas of the world. So I guess what's your most like memorable kind of experience, like in maybe consulting or like something where you're somewhere else and like you're connecting with a different group of people in a different area?
So when you travel for consulting, you're not really immersing yourself like per se in the community. You're staying in fancy hotels and going to corporate offices and meeting. So I don't know that it's the sort of like truly immersive experience that traveling and really doing something in the community might feel like. When I was in college, though, I spent a month in South Africa doing a trip focused on HIV treatment and prevention, which was probably like one of the more meaningful travels in my life. South Africa is an exquisite country. Cape Town is a beautiful city, but it has a really rich and complicated history with apartheid and the treatment of the Black inhabitants of that country. And we went into the various areas where folks lived who experienced high rates of HIV, who had HIV, who had a loved one with HIV. And we really got to see how people lived, what the barriers they faced were, like what life circumstances resulted in them getting HIV in the first place, how hard it is to get appropriate health care, the stigma. One of those, I think, like eye-opening, incredible visits. It's interesting to think about an experience like that from 25 years ago and today, where it's so hard to even get. I think I took for granted 25 years ago that they even had access to a lot of the medications and treatment that they did through a lot of the US sponsored initiatives and drug programs. And a lot of that is really in jeopardy or has completely ended. And so I don't even know what it would be like to visit now. The other thing that I think of when I was in South Africa is Hurricane Katrina hit while I was there, including the breaking of the levees. And there was a newspaper I remember reading in the house we were staying at that said Third World America in big bold letters because just the devastation that was being experienced in New Orleans, and then also a lot of the worst parts of humanity were coming out and the looting and the way people were being treated back then. And it was, I can't explain it except that it is a like a moment. It's like a picture in my head that I've never forgotten of what do other people from other countries see and think about when they think about America. And 25 years ago, I realized it's not always positive. And today, I think we all know that it's not always positive, and but it's not unique to this current generation.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a great point. I think there's like a lot of stigma surrounding, especially like how different parts, different groups within America are viewed. Like, for example, like Indian Americans and like the model minority stereotypes, all of these things. And that kind of brings me to think about like how you feel about raising your children and like having a family in like the California and America of today? And what do you feel optimistic about that maybe is like different from how you felt when you grew up in California in your childhood? What would you say is maybe a shift in your like belief?
I grew up, I assume, similar to you, as a model minority where people assume that your parents are a doctor and that you have a lot of energy put into your education and all of that. I didn't experience a tremendous amount of racism growing up. I had pockets. An incident when I was a child in swim class where another kid told their parent that they didn't want to go into the pool with me because it was like duty in the pool. That's like a memory that I think I haven't forgotten. I remember being at a bowling alley in my tween years and somebody telling me that I should go back to Somalia where I belonged. I'm not from Somalia. My parents are Indian, but I was very thin. And so I think it was a comment about my frailty, and Somalia is a way of describing me as other, not American. I had these two instances growing up that I remember, but overall, I think however hard things ever were, I always look back at my childhood as being incredibly privileged. I don't know if you know this, but my husband is Nigerian, and so my kids are half Indian, half Black. And so their experience in the world is different than the one that I had growing up. They're Black presenting. I think their experience will be largely impacted by the fact that they are Black as well as being Indian. But being Black in America is very different than being Indian in America. And so I think a lot of how my thinking has shifted has partially been about my own experiences growing up in politics today, but also seeing the world through my husband's eyes and through my kids' eyes and wanting to both be a good mother to them, but also imagining sort of the things in their life that will be hard in a way that I'll never know, but also like really important and dynamic in a way that I'll also never get to experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really understated part of the Indian American experience is like this thing you described about like the model minority, but also like sort of intersectionality and like mixed couples, et cetera, mixed families. I guess like how do you feel about or how do you integrate your culture into like how you parent your children? And like what do you think is that extent to which you like use and like explain to them the traditions and values that your parents explain to you?
Yeah, it's really funny. I've been really like intentional about teaching my kids like the different gods and the different stories and the holidays in a way that I don't think my parents were as intentional with me. And I think it's almost like it was their culture, it was both of their culture. All the weddings and the holidays I just went to, it was effortless. There was always something going on that I was being brought to, that they were taking me along with. And so they didn't sit me down and tell me the story of Holi. I actually didn't know what the religious story and mythology behind Holi was until 2 years ago when I bought a book about Holi and read it to my daughter. And I had all of it growing up, but I didn't have it in the same way. And so with my kids, I've bought like every single book about every single holiday and God, and we go through it and we read it because I want them to know. I always worry as the generations go by and we live in America and we continue to like meet people outside of our race and ethnicity and marry outside of our race and ethnicity and religion, that the stories will get diluted and completely lost. I think one of my biggest regrets is that I don't speak Hindi. I understand it like moderately well, but I don't speak it. And it's one of my big regrets. And if I had it, I would speak it to my kids and try to preserve the language in my culture, but I don't speak it. And so, like telling the stories, exposing them to the various holidays, doing the events at school has been how I do it. But it's interesting because it requires a lot of intention. Like you have to find the events and make a point of scheduling it and going to it because it won't just happen unless you make a lot of effort. Whereas I think when I was growing up, my parents didn't have to like think really hard. How are we going to make sure that our kids know about the volley? Like the volley was going to happen. And so I think it's been a lot more intentional for me. But I also, like, after having kids, it became something that I realized was really like important to me as something that I wanted them to have growing up. And I wonder as they grow up, like how they will identify and the things that they'll want to carry forward in their lives. And then when they one day have kids, like what they're going to teach their kids. I wonder. But all I can do is teach them as much as I can teach them about my stuff and create as much space for my husband to teach them all the stories and traditions of his culture and
Yeah,
then
and I think
see what they do with it.
yeah, and I think that's like honestly very unique and like interesting how like the ways in which cultural traditions and expressions are spread throughout generations. I also I'm pretty similar to you in that like I also regret like not fully learning Hindi. Like I can understand it and I can understand what people say and I can like speak it to an extent, but I don't think I would be able to like do this podcast speaking Hindi. So
Good, because
that's
I wouldn't participate. I wouldn't be able to.
yeah. And yeah, that's actually really interesting how like you learn more and more about like Holi as you got older. But I guess is would you say that there is any like family tradition or anything that like your parents insisted you do that you didn't really like when you were growing up and now you you secretly look back and miss it?
I we didn't go to temple a lot when I was growing up, but I remember going to pujas at people's homes, which they were, I don't know if you've gone to any pujas with your family there. They can be really long. I remember feeling like they were really boring. And that is something that I kind of miss. And I also wish I knew how to do some of it better. So, now when we go to my parents' home in Southern California, I'll ask my mom to take us all to the temple and we'll go. It's not a full-blown hour-long puja, but we go and that's probably the single biggest thing that I never appreciated as a kid that I really appreciate now and seek out. And I think my mom was initially like really surprised by it that I wanted to do it, but it also I think ended up meaning a lot to her. And my kids they go to it with a lot of like curiosity. And even my little one, who I think was like 2 when she first went, 2-year-olds can be a little rambunctious, but they like walk into this temple and their behavior just comes. They can tell that there's like a serenity and importance in going. And I think they can see it in their nani that it's important to her. And they're really like calm and attentive and curious and respectful to the pundit. And it's become this like tradition that has been very meaningful. But as a kid, I hated it.
Yeah. That's really nice. So like now you like when you go back to Southern California, you want to relive those memories and
Yeah, I think
experience.
so. And even
Yeah.
for the volley this year, my 6-year-old has a friend and her best friend in school is also Indian. And on the volley, I asked them, I said, can we come to your house and can we do a Lakshmi Puja at your house? And the truth was that I didn't know how to do it. I knew conceptually what it was from like the stories, but I didn't actually know what to do, like what items I needed to have and the things I needed to say and the gestures I needed to do. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I wanted my kids to experience it. And so I had to outsource it, I guess, for lack of a better word, phone a friend and get help because I'm trying to create all of this for my kids, but I don't actually know how to do it myself.
Yeah. So I guess were your parents immigrants from India or did they also grow up in
No,
Southern
they're
California?
both immigrants. When did they move? I think they moved in the 70s, early 70s. My dad went to medical school in India and then came here and did his residency and fellowship out here. He and my mom had an arranged marriage, so he went back to India. He and my mom got married, and then my mom came out here. Didn't know anybody, didn't speak the language, completely away from her family, and they established roots here and have been here ever since. What
Yeah,
about your
so like
parents?
mine immigrated from India, but I also have a lot of family in America too, like my parents, cousins, siblings, etc. But when I go back to India, I go back to India like every 1 or 2 years, and I usually when I was younger, I usually would just play and hang out. But nowadays, when I go back, I like have a lot of great conversations with grandparents, elders in my family, and I get a lot of good advice and just generally just learn a lot of things about the world. So I guess like asking you, like, what would you say is like a piece of advice from your family that blends Indian cultural wisdom with like American practicality?
That's a good question. I don't know if this is exactly the answer you're looking for, but my Nana, my mom's dad, who passed away like 20 years ago, whenever I went to India, he gave me books. And every time I was there, he was always reading. He was reading the newspaper, he was reading books, he was reading magazines, and he had this habit of cutting out clips of articles from magazines and he would give it to different people depending on the content of that magazine. And I think him reading is like one of the foundational memories of my childhood. And I think that, I don't know if this is true in everybody's family, but in mine, books were to be respected. You don't put books on the floor, you don't touch books with your feet. I still like really believe in the importance of reading and literature in a world of tweets and Facebook posts and Instagram and stories. I think the importance of picking up a book or a Kindle or whatever and like reading really thoughtful stories with well-developed characters, reading nonfiction, reading history, like that, I think is something that people don't do as much anymore. And I think the way that Hinduism really like upholds and reveres books is something that will never go away. It's transcends all cultures, countries, and religions. And if people could spend a little bit less time on social media and a little bit more time reading a book, I think we might all be in slightly better position than we are now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I have the same thing in my family about you have to be like no books on the floor, nothing, because
Yeah,
stepping on them is like figuratively,
disrespectful.
yeah, disrespectful. Yeah. And just to wrap things up, do you have any general advice for Indian American youth like myself in like today?
I want to go back to something you said in the beginning about being a model minority, because not all, I spent many years, like 15 years in San Francisco before coming to Oakland. And there's a big Chinese American population in San Francisco that is not the privileged minority that a lot of us think of when we think of Chinese immigrants in America. And similarly, like not all Indian Americans are like in this privileged class of engineer and doctors' kids. Some people came and were forced to be farmers in Central California, et cetera. And I always think about the diversity of what it means to be an Indian American, and that my story, I think, is probably closer to the stereotypical Indian American story. The daughter of a physician, the sister of an attorney. I grew up to be a physician myself. I think the thing that is important to remember is if you've read Caste, like we experience some of the difficulties of not being white Americans, but we also have a lot of privilege in how people assume that we are and assume the priorities and values we have in our culture. And I think the advice I would give to Indian Americans and really anybody is to just always think about how we can like give back and help others. I feel like there's just so many people who are less fortunate than us. There's certainly so many people who are less fortunate than me, and finding like meaning and purpose in whatever we do is extremely important. You'll go to college in a couple of years and then you'll maybe go to grad school and then you'll eventually find a job. And I hope that you and everybody finds a way to feel like they're making impact, they're doing something meaningful. Making money is good too. It certainly makes life a lot less stressful, but it's really hard to find purpose in the day if you can't figure out a way to make impact and help other people. And so I hope that people will still find value and importance in careers like that.
Yeah, and then just like circling back real quick to the model minority thing you said, I think you made a really good connection there about like this honorary whiteness symbol that both detaches Indian Americans from other minorities, but also puts them at a point where they're not fully white enough, but also not enough of a minority. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.